Be careful when returning from the dungeon. There are dangers between there and here that do not appear until you are tired and hurt. This week we have a really interesting monster, partially inspired by the anime Delicious in Dungeon. There are going to be minor spoilers throughout, just mostly for a monster and like a couple monsters and like one event from one of the episodes from the middle of the series. But at the same time, it's one of those things that's been covered over and over and over. So count yourself as warned. But yeah, I've been watching it with my partner, and we both love the anime, especially the world building and how that leads to a lot of the characters' moments and interactions. One of my favorite moments up to this point was when another party was completely wiped out by the treasure bugs. But then when our band of weirdos came upon them, they turned those mimic-esque monsters into a lovely snack. Then later on, the interaction between the treasure bugs and the mimic as predator and prey really inspired me to do something around that family of creatures. So, to get started on this process, we need our references. And if you're new here and don't know why Past Me has a bunch of cards with weird monster parts on them, check out my tutorial in the card above where I go through this process for making weird monsters. Now, as I was saying, we have some really interesting references today. Out of these, I like the more plant-like ones. I want to go in that sort of direction to make that Delicious in Dungeon mimic. Now, as we start the drawing with the first sketch of this creature, I actually wanted to ask y'all's thoughts about this monster making show. I've been enjoying making it, and I feel like I'm getting better every week. These monster cards are a really fun project, and I think they can do a good job of setting up mini adventures or areas of the world, and I want to expand that idea in the future. But before I commit too hard to a particular direction, I wanted to ask, what parts of this series do you enjoy most? Is there something that you'd want me to expand on or give a bit more love? What do you want to see out of my channel in the future? Let me know in the comments below. Now that we're getting a more fully formed scene, I wanted to go into how this creature works and what role it takes in the ecosystem it lives in. Call this the lore section of the video, but with fundamental differences. Of course, we're making a mimic style creature, but in the greater fantasy genre, there are two types of mimic, and I wanted to define which one I'm using. So the first type is the magical creature made of meat, teeth, and nightmares that can transform into anything but mostly chooses chests because those lure people in easily. Think of this like the D&D style mimics. While on the other hand, we also have a more realistic ambush predator that hides itself in or grows a shell that resembles various commonly approached objects like treasure or cabinets. They're nearly always invertebrates and commonly crustaceans or insects of some kind. This is the version that's in Delicious in Dungeon and the version that I'm making today. So we have this nature scene, which is already a twist for mimics. Instead of putting the mimic in the dungeon, locked to a dark room in an ancient brick hallway where adventurers expect them, this particular species of mimic lives near the dungeon, lurking amongst the swaying trees that line the paths to and from dungeons. It's fairly obvious in this instance what the mimic looks like from this scene. That long insectoid body isn't hard to spot with how I'm drawing it. But actually, there are two other mimics in this scene. Yeah, all these detailed trees here are mimics. They actually exhibit sexual dimorphism. The males will have the more segmented bodies with the three strong pincers at the top, while females will have hard tooth-like growths and grow taller in this more asparagus-like shape. And they usually plant themselves in pods of 5 or 6, enough that they are likely to equal or outnumber the party members that would pass by. As far as how these mimics attack, they keep to that ambush predator style, waiting for their prey adventurers to approach. Then they strike as a group, reaching down and picking up the members of the party that are most vulnerable. These creatures will grab adventurers by their heads or necks using their pincers or numerous tooth-like growths. The pod will then try to get at least 2 adventurers at once. Of course, Right after that, the other party members will wheel around to attack these monsters and free their compatriots. That's where we get the real kicker. The adventurers are exhausted from fighting in the dungeon. These mimics don't attack the groups going to the dungeon. Those are healthy, prepared adventurers with backpacks full of healing potions and plenty of mana for fireballs. No, they go for the tired ones, with heavy bags full of treasure, beaten up and coming back home from fighting that troll or dragon or goblin king at the deepest parts of the dungeon. So when the remaining party members try to save their friends trapped by the initial ambush, that's when the remaining mimics lean down and grab their own meals. Once the whole party is up hanging by the mouths of the mimics, they're basically vulnerable with to everything else that they want to do. They're thrashing around, tiring themselves out until they fall limp. And that's when they're injected with a digestive venom and drank right out of their clothes. Then, other weak monsters that live by the entrances of the dungeon can walk over and pick up the treasure and items that the dead party leaves behind. This will hide the evidence of the ambush and get these weaker creatures their own treasure to guard. This also refreshes the early portions of the dungeon that would otherwise be cleared out with the masses of low-leveled parties. And in addition, stories of parties not returning would help the dungeon seem more dangerous and be more inviting to those stronger parties who are also more likely to make it out of the dungeon and into the waiting maws of these mimics. Of course, because this is inspired by Delicious in Dungeon, I have to cover how these creatures taste. I'm thinking that the sort of knowledge check that would lead other people to not really eat these creatures would be that the venom glands stored throughout the stalk have to be removed, and those are straight producing digestive juices. Though I think that the flesh itself is going to be closer to a crustacean, sweet and fluffy. Though it'd probably be a bit tougher than what you'd expect from other species. These mimics have to move fast and support a tall body without the buoyancy that comes from living in an ocean. Their shells, though, that's going to be the specialist part of the meal. They would be more woody than anything else and be edible on their own. They would cook like bamboo and could even be ground up to make a flour with loads of vitamins and calcium. The bread made from that flour could also be widely known to help hair grow stronger and thicker, even if the bread itself is hard to eat on its own. Sweet. Now that we have the lore / methodology of the monster, let's give it a name and figure out some abilities. I've already been calling it a type of mimic, and it grows tall like a stalk of corn, so stalk mimic could be a good name for it. Alrighty, now let's name what this thing could do. We already know that it's stealthy because it convinces people that it's a tree when it's really not. So let's make an ability along that angle. Deceptive camouflage. Next ability is that set of concerted strikes. Let's make it coordinated pod ambushes. Finally, the venom. I've already said the phrase, so digestive venom seems to work pretty well. Now, let's go over the stats. I think D&D 5th edition's spread will work well enough for this instance. Strength, we'll put it a 4. Stock mimic relies on its strength to go lean down, grab, and lift its prey high up. And if the mimic is too weak to pick up an adventurer in plate armor, then it's not gonna last too long. Dexterity will put it a 1. There's not gonna be much agile dodging being done here. Really, it's not even doing much movement at all, mostly just swaying, reaching over, and picking things up. And yes, I know stealth relies on dexterity in 5th edition. I have another way, though, for these creatures to blend in. Constitution will put it a 2. Yeah, this creature can take 1 or 2 hits, maybe 3. But if, for example, a dwarf with an axe and a pot on his back is going to try to chop one down, these guys are going down, no questions asked. Intelligence will be a -2. It's a wild creature, doesn't need to know too many facts. Wisdom, though, will be at a 3. Ambush predators need to know when and who to strike. If they can't tell the difference between a tired and healthy adventurer, they're doomed to become someone else's meal. Charisma will be at a 4. Yeah, this is weird for this kind of monster to have such a high charisma score, but I have 2 justifications for it. 1, those coordinated strikes rely heavily upon silent communication between the stock mimics. Being able to express strategy surreptitiously as well as teamwork in general, well, that's the domain of the charisma stat. Then 2, this creature hides not by using cover and staying out of sight, but by lying. What the stock mimic is trying to do is communicate the idea that it's a tree, and if you're looking for it, it's fairly easy to spot. I mean, it's plainly there. But the fact that it is blending into its environment and tricking people is more on that communication and lying that the charisma stat covers. Finally, let's make the core phrases that determine the behavior of this creature. Sway until the weak rest. This drives that ambush compulsion where these creatures will gently sway, keep hiding until they are ready to strike, and will always strike those who are easiest to grab. Strike yours at the right time, then they will get the others. Stock mimics are all about their teamwork, but their attacks are fairly independent of the team. So they're not really doing combo strikes. They're more, hey, I'm working with you to take out these 2 threats or get these 2 vulnerable people. Once the adventurer is hanging with their feet off the ground, the mimic has done its job, and it's up to the rest of the pod to make the math work. Let all but the best go. With ambush predators, you need to know who is best to strike. And if those vulnerable adventurers aren't there for weeks, that's fine. The best meal for these kinds of creatures are ones eaten safely. And that's that. This is such a fun monster that I would love to see the Delicious and Dungeon Party take on and cook. It feels like it would fit in very well with the world and with how many of the monsters work. It could even lead to a sort of repeat of the treasure insect episode where one party gets got, then Laos, Senshi, and the gang move the bodies out of the way to eat the stock mimics. Since y'all have made it this far, it seems that you enjoy this video, so would you mind hitting that like button and subscribing? I'll be here every week with new monsters for you to stare at. Thank you very much. With that, let's bring this video to a close. For those of you with dark skies, good night. And if you have bright days, good morning. Whatever part of the world you're from, I hope you have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, and night. Goodbye!